There were so many people who knew this was happening to Phoenix while it was happening to her. And nobody stepped forward and helped anybody.
She was just 5 years old when the world failed her. Phoenix Sinclair should have been drawing purple dinosaurs, giggling during tickle fights and sneaking cookies before dinner. Instead, her laughter faded away, not in an instant, but piece by piece, while everyone who should have noticed didn't. And her story makes us ask, how many chances did we miss to rewrite her ending? To understand how Phoenix's story unfolded and why it still matters today, we need to go back to the beginning. Not to the sadness, but to the little girl behind it all, because every child's story starts with hope. Phoenix Victoria was born on April 23, 2000 in Winnipeg, Canada, to Samantha 𝐂𝐫𝐜𝐻 and Steve Sinclair. She was a bright and imaginative child who found joy in the simple things, strumming her guitar, sketching her thoughts, diving into books, and escaping into movies. There was a quiet sweetness about her, the kind that made people pause and hope for the best in her future. Her parents, Samantha and Steve, were still in their teens when she arrived, just 18 and 19. Their early lives had been marked by instability, having been removed from their families and placed into foster care. That system became their version of home, and when they aged out, they stepped into adulthood without much guidance or preparation. With no high school diplomas and no steady work, they leaned heavily on government support. Both also faced ongoing struggles with substance use, a painful echo of their own upbringings. It was a deeply unfair cycle, and tragically, they weren't equipped to break it. In a world full of parenting books and baby advice columns, no one ever quite writes a chapter for what happens when two broken pasts try to raise hope.
But before we begin, I just want to say thank you to my amazing viewers and subscribers. Your support through likes, shares, and comments means the world to me. Your engagement helps make these stories even more meaningful. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our growing community of true crime enthusiasts. Samantha's experience with motherhood began much earlier than most. At just 16, while still living under state care herself, she became pregnant for the first time. That child, too, was taken into government custody. So when she later found out she was expecting Phoenix, child welfare agencies stepped in right away. Their goal was to prevent history from repeating itself and hopefully offer a better outcome this time around. Phoenix's arrival was unexpected for many around her. Samantha had kept the pregnancy largely to herself until just before giving birth. As her due date neared, a social worker visited the home she shared with Stephen to check on their readiness. What she found, unfortunately, was far from reassuring. There were no signs of preparation, no crib, no clothing, not even a rattle in sight. It was one of those moments where the only thing that had arrived on time was the baby. When asked about her first child, Samantha explained that he had been removed by child services due to concerns rooted in her own past. Because she had suffered neglect growing up, authorities feared she might unintentionally continue the cycle. She also admitted that during both of her pregnancies, she hadn't seen a doctor, not once. Her reasoning? A deep discomfort with medical professionals, particularly male ones, shaped largely by unsettling things she'd watched on television. Apparently, primetime drama had done more damage than just clogging up evening schedules. She also acknowledged to the caseworker that, emotionally, she didn't feel ready to raise a child. As a result, a plan was made for Phoenix to be placed under child welfare's care from birth. But when the moment came, Samantha had second thoughts. At the hospital, she expressed a desire to keep her daughter. Still, after a conversation with the worker, who gently reminded her that many parents in similar situations later welcomed help, both she and Steve reverted to the original plan. It was a heart-wrenching decision, made not out of a lack of love, but from the quiet weight of knowing they weren't prepared. Life, in its twisted humor, had given them a child at a moment when they were still trying to grow up themselves. Phoenix was initially placed in emergency foster care, though her biological parents were still permitted to visit. In a turn that few had expected, Samantha and Steve made those visits consistently, showing up every week without fail. However, Samantha declined to participate in a psychological assessment, a key step required by child services for any possibility of reunification. At 5 months old, Phoenix was returned to her parents after they completed a basic parenting course. Around this time, Samantha finally agreed to undergo the mental health screening she had previously resisted. The evaluation, however, was quite narrow in scope. The psychiatrist's job was to determine whether Samantha's emotional detachment toward her baby stemmed from clinical depression. The conclusion: no depression, just a naturally reserved personality. It seemed she wasn't sad, she was just Samantha. And unfortunately, emotional distance doesn't come with a how-to manual. Roughly a year after Phoenix's arrival, Samantha gave birth to another daughter, named 𝐂𝐸, in April 2001. Unlike her older sister's early days, 𝐂𝐸 was allowed to stay at home with her parents. But stability didn't last long. Just 2 months later, police were called following an argument between Samantha and Stephen that escalated. Samantha accused Stephen of physically harming her after he noticed a mark on her neck. She admitted she had been unfaithful with her ex, who also happened to be the father of her first child. Stephen, on the other hand, claimed their argument wasn't about infidelity at all. Instead, he said it started because Samantha had used their child tax benefit to buy alcohol. According to him, her drinking made the home unpredictable and unsafe for their kids. Still, regardless of whose version sounded more reasonable, Stephen was the one charged in the end. While Stephen spent the next 2 days in custody, the children remained with Samantha. When he returned to get the girls, he expressed concern over 𝐂𝐸's condition, saying she hadn't been properly cared for. Around that same time, a caseworker made note of Stephen's involvement with his daughters, describing him as attentive, present, and willing to engage. Proof that sometimes the messiest situations are also the most complicated.
1 month later, the relationship officially came to an end. Stephen took over full-time care of both Phoenix and 𝐂𝐸, stating that Samantha had walked away and left the family behind. Then, tragedy struck. On July 15th, Stephen found baby 𝐂𝐸 unresponsive in her crib. Her passing was determined to be caused by complications from pneumonia. Authorities found no indication of wrongdoing. Following 𝐂𝐸's passing, Stephen remained Phoenix's primary caregiver. However, he often relied on others for help, frequently leaving her in the care of friends, Kim Edwards and Rohan Stevenson, or his sister, Jenny. Despite not having laid eyes on Phoenix for several months, social services decided in October 2001 to formally close her case. Their involvement ended, and she quietly slipped off their radar, an administrative blind spot with long-lasting consequences. It wasn't until February 2003 that Phoenix was back on their radar. She had been taken to the hospital by Kim and Rohan after a piece of styrofoam had remained lodged in her nose for several weeks. The attending doctor grew concerned that Stephen might not follow through with the antibiotics prescribed and reported a possible case of neglect to child protection. Still, nothing came of the report. In a tragic twist, paperwork seemed to move faster than concern. By June of that same year, Child Services decided it was time to intervene again. Concerns were raised after it was discovered that an all-day drinking gathering had taken place at Stephen's home, with Phoenix present. As a result, authorities removed her from his care and advised him to complete alcohol counseling before any chance of reunification. In the interim, guardianship was temporarily handed over to his friends, Kim and Rohan. Surprisingly, not long after this, Phoenix was returned to her father, even though he hadn't yet completed the steps required. And soon after, the familiar pattern resumed. Stephen began relying once again on friends and family to watch over her. Then in April 2004, an unexpected visitor arrived at Rohan's home, Samantha. After a long period of absence, she wanted to spend time with Phoenix. Samantha said she was working to rebuild her life and was hoping to be more involved as a parent. She also expressed concern that Stephen wasn't allowing her to see their daughter. What's more, she was uneasy about the fact that one of Stephen's sisters, who had regular contact with Phoenix, had been convicted years earlier in a case involving a child under her supervision. Ironically, it seems Samantha was now trying to protect her daughter from the very chaos she once contributed to. At some point, Rohan contacted Stephen to ask whether Phoenix could spend some time with her mother. Stephen agreed under the condition that Phoenix would be returned afterward. But that return never happened. Samantha kept the child, and Phoenix didn't come back. Nearly 2 years later, in March of 2006, a 12-year-old boy approached his mother with a confession that would change everything. For months, he said, his father and stepmother had been pretending that a 5-year-old girl was still alive, when, in truth, she wasn't. He claimed to have seen something no child should ever witness. His mother, alarmed, took the information to the authorities. By that time, Samantha was in a relationship with someone new, Carl Wesley McKay. He had an extensive and well-documented history of troubling behavior in past relationships. Previous incidents involved serious disputes and threats, and both of his own children had come under the attention of Child Protective Services. His background, ironically, wasn't hidden. It was fully accessible within the very system designed to safeguard children. And yet, despite that, no deeper inquiry was made before Samantha went on to have 2 more children with him. Apparently, red flags are easier to document than to act on. It was Carl's former common-law partner who eventually reached out to authorities, moved by something her son had shared about Phoenix. It was a heartbreaking decision for any parent to make, exposing such a painful truth, but one she hoped would finally bring answers. For months after Samantha had taken Phoenix from Rohan's care in April 2004, child welfare officials claimed they were unaware of the pair's whereabouts. Their reappearance didn't come through outreach or concern. It came when Samantha requested financial assistance, a moment that reopened the door that had been closed for far too long. By then, Stephen had left Manitoba and moved to Ontario, possibly in search of a fresh start, or maybe just some distance from a situation that had already begun unraveling. In 2005, at least 2 calls were made to Child Services, warning that Phoenix might not be safe.
These reports included concerns about neglect and substance misuse, as well as troubling signs of emotional distress in the little girl. A friend of Samantha's even recalled hearing Phoenix crying from behind a locked door. The sadness in these reports was hard to ignore, and yet somehow it was. In the end, it seemed like the system had fallen into a deep sleep at the worst possible time, just when someone needed to be fully awake. Roughly 3 months before Phoenix passed away, child welfare workers were sent to check in at Samantha's apartment. When they arrived, Samantha turned them away, explaining that she had someone visiting. The worker was only able to see her newborn and had no interaction with Phoenix. Despite that, the visit was recorded, and the case was officially closed just days later, without any follow-up. Over the course of Phoenix's life, no fewer than 27 different child welfare workers were assigned to her case. At one point, it was noted that Phoenix had a habit of calling various women in her life Mom, a quiet indicator that she lacked a strong emotional connection to her own mother. Samantha had long been described as emotionally disengaged, rarely showing much affection or attentiveness. Reports frequently highlighted the parents' lack of consistency and involvement, and yet time after time, no action was taken. The pattern was always the same: a visit, a brief assessment, and a case closed. If neglect had a theme song, it might have been the sound of paperwork being filed away too soon. After Carl's former partner came forward with new information, authorities began searching for him and Samantha. When they located the pair, the couple attempted to convince officers that another child was Phoenix. The attempt was quickly dismissed, and both were brought in for further questioning. It was a moment that finally brought accountability into focus, though not without a heavy cost. According to Samantha, she and Carl had returned home from visiting Carl's father on June 11, 2005. When they arrived, she claimed they discovered Phoenix in the basement, unresponsive. She initially believed the child may have choked while they were away, as Phoenix had seemed perfectly fine earlier that day. Samantha later acknowledged that the day before, Carl had forcefully pushed Phoenix's head to the floor, something she now thought could have contributed to what happened. She told authorities that Carl attempted to perform CPR once they realized Phoenix wasn't breathing, but their efforts didn't bring her back. The child had passed away. Faced with the situation, the couple made a decision that defied both logic and compassion. Instead of calling for help, they chose to conceal what had happened. They wrapped Phoenix's and disposed of it. It was a choice that spoke volumes, not just about fear or guilt, but about the failure of every safeguard that should have intervened long before this moment. Ironically, the truth finally surfaced, but only after everything else had fallen apart. During her interview, Samantha disclosed that on occasion, she had used a household item as a form of discipline with Phoenix. Her words were delivered in a flat tone, offering no further detail, just one more troubling piece in a much larger puzzle. When asked about the morning Phoenix became unresponsive, Samantha said the little girl had seemed completely fine, peaceful, alert, and showing no immediate signs of concern. That was how she recalled it. But as the conversation went on, her version of events began to shift. She suggested that Phoenix may have had some kind of episode while they were out, even pointing to an area in the home where she believed the child had been unwell. Then came a quiet turning point. Samantha acknowledged that something else had occurred earlier, something that might have been important. She remembered that the day before Phoenix's condition worsened, Carl had acted roughly and the child had fallen to the ground. The investigator followed up, gently asking her to clarify the timing. After a pause, Samantha confirmed it happened on June 10th.
After returning, Carl said Samantha asked him to clean the basement and paint over anything that might raise suspicion. Not long after, the couple welcomed another child into the world. In the months that followed, they continued to collect welfare benefits meant for Phoenix. If anyone asked where she was, they simply claimed she was staying with a relative. It was a lie they wore like an old coat, comfortable, familiar, and carefully buttoned up. Eventually, Carl directed police to Phoenix's burial site near the Fisher River landfill. Though unsure of the exact location, he pointed out several possible spots. The area was quiet and ordinary, hiding a truth that had been buried far too long. The investigation later revealed that Phoenix had experienced extensive physical harm throughout her young life. Many of the marks on her body had not healed, which indicated she had likely been in ongoing discomfort in the period leading up to her passing. It was a heartbreaking reality, one that reflected how much had been overlooked. Both Carl and Samantha were eventually charged in connection with what had happened. Their trial began in late 2008. Throughout the proceedings, neither showed any visible emotion. There were no outward signs of sadness or acknowledgement for what Phoenix had endured, only a quiet detachment that left many observers stunned. Carl's youngest son testified and described a deeply troubling environment inside the home. He said both adults were often harsh toward Phoenix, and that his father sometimes treated the mistreatment like a joke. She was frequently isolated in a dark room, with little comfort or care. The boy remembered hearing her cry from the basement where she had been made to sleep. When he tried to help, by offering a blanket or adjusting the heat, he was scolded. In that home, kindness had to be kept quiet, and even then, it was rarely welcomed. Allison recalled that the room Phoenix was often kept in was dimly lit, and she couldn't remember if there was even a bed. On one visit, she saw Phoenix standing quietly with a blanket over her head, dressed only in undergarments, just watching her. Her appearance was unkempt, with markings on her skin that may have been dirt or scratches. Allison couldn't be sure. A week later, she visited again, and an unsettling feeling overcame her. She said it felt like something awful had happened. When she walked through the back door, her attention was drawn immediately to the basement stairs. When asked what she noticed, Allison responded that she saw what looked like small red droplets on the steps. Eventually, both Carl and Samantha were convicted and given life sentences with no chance of release for at least 25 years. The courtroom, though filled with emotion, didn't witness much from the couple themselves. Carl did attempt to offer an apology during sentencing, expressing regret to everyone involved, including Phoenix. But before finishing his written statement, he broke down in tears and was unable to continue. When Samantha was given her turn to speak, she denied any responsibility. She insisted she had done nothing wrong and claimed that Phoenix knew she hadn't caused her harm. According to her, Carl was entirely to blame. She went on to say she had often been mistreated herself and claimed she stepped in to shield her daughter whenever possible.
The detective, listening to her, calmly responded with a skeptical, "Yeah, okay, lady." Years later, in 2022, Samantha was granted short-term supervised visits outside the prison. These were meant for family contact and cultural support. For many watching the case closely, it felt like the system had once again offered leniency where accountability had fallen short. Phoenix was eventually laid to rest during a small funeral held in Winnipeg, with her burial at Brookside Cemetery. The service came shortly after her remains had been recovered, giving her loved ones a long overdue opportunity to say goodbye. It was a quiet farewell for a child who had never truly known peace. Nearly a decade after her passing, a $14 million public inquiry concluded that Phoenix had been failed by the very system meant to protect her. The commissioner's statement was powerful. Phoenix had been left unprotected in an unsafe home, despite multiple reports warning of serious concerns. Time and again, case files were opened, then quickly closed, often without workers ever seeing the child in person. The findings were as painful as they were predictable. The inquiry didn't just point to workload or training gaps within Winnipeg's child welfare system. It concluded that the real issue wasn't ignorance of policy, but a failure to follow it. There was a fundamental breakdown in understanding the core mission: to protect children from harm, even when the warning signs were clear. Although Carl and Samantha were held legally accountable, no one within the Child Welfare Department lost their job or faced formal consequences. As one reporter noted, the lack of disciplinary action was hard to justify and harder to accept. Public frustration was understandable, and it only grew louder as time passed. Despite all of this, Phoenix's godmother still found reason to hope. She pointed to the 62 recommendations made by the inquiry, 20 of which had already begun to be implemented by Manitoba's government. One of the most important takeaways was that this wasn't just a local issue. Children from Indigenous communities across Canada remained overrepresented in child welfare. The system needed more than reform, it needed to be reimagined. Thank you for spending time with Phoenix's story today. It's difficult to grasp how a child could be known to social services from the very beginning and still fall so completely off the radar. There were warnings, alerts, and second chances, but somehow she remained unseen. It wasn't just a case that slipped through the system, it was one that quietly vanished in plain sight. And that's the part that truly stays with you. What are your thoughts on this case? If you follow real-life stories like this one and want to stay informed, feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications. I release new videos at least 3 times a week, each one shining a light on stories that deserve not to be forgotten.